Bring in our panel. Bruce Reinhart is a former federal prosecutor. Dan Hochheiser, a criminal defense attorney. Gentlemen, we thank you both. Bruce in our Florida newsroom, Dan from Newsmax, New York. And Dan, to you first. If the lawsuit is successful that the ACLU has filed, what do you think it will accomplish in terms of national policy?
Well, what it will do first in Oklahoma, it will direct the Oklahoma state government to permit the press, as the eyes and ears of the public, to view the execution from the time the prisoner enters the chamber and the lines of the intravenous are put into his body till the time the body is removed from the chamber. Now, nationally, that should be what happens. Whether that does happen in the future all over the country may be the subject of further litigation.
Well, Bruce, we see the premise and the notion that members of the press and other witnesses need to see this from start to finish, a public execution. But what about those who have committed these capital offenses? Quite often the murders take place without a lot of public scrutiny, and yet it seems that there is a building public sentiment in favor of convicted killers. Maybe this is apart from legal questions, Bruce, but the whole rationale and this whole need to come to the aid, not of the accused, but the convicted in this situation, are we moving publicly where we're getting away from values and truly upholding the rule of law for more public passions in this debate?
You know, JD, this whole debate shows the national schizophrenia on the death penalty. Because on the one hand, we are saying this person has done something so horrible and so heinous that they deserve the ultimate punishment. They deserve to be put to death. And the purpose in putting them to death is to deter others and to punish them for this horrible, evil thing that they did. But on the flip side, we're saying, but we want to do it nicely. We want to do it humanely because we're better than that. Well, I don't know that you can always reconcile those two things. And in one respect, what the ACLU is asking for, they ought to be careful what they ask for. Because if we really are out to deter other people, then why don't we broadcast executions? Why don't we show the world what happens to you if you do one of these horrible things? And if we did that, I think the ACLU might not want us to be broadcasting these, and I think the American public would be horrified by what they see.
So Bruce, it sounds as if you've picked up on a strand of the reasoning that the ACLU has put forth in the case, that if it's public and it acts as a deterrent, that's why the ACLU says there needs to be witnesses there. Am I interpreting their legal contention correct in the way they brought the action in Oklahoma?
I'm not totally familiar with the action in Oklahoma, but I think the argument is that there should be transparency here, that if we're going to execute someone, we ought to do it right, and we ought to do it humanely, and the person being executed should know what's going to happen to them. And what I'm suggesting is that's certainly a nice legal argument, and that's certainly a wonderful sentiment, but why? Why do we feel that we owe it to this person who we've decided did a horrible thing that they should be treated in this way?
Dan, he's put the question out there. Answer it.
Well, I don't agree with Bruce on much of what he said. First, this is not about killing people nicely or not nicely. This is about the Constitution. We have a First Amendment, which says we should have an unabridged freedom of the press, which acts as the public's proxy to scrutinize what the government does at trials, when they kill people, and other important events. And on the other part of the Constitution, we have the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits us from inflicting cruel and unusual punishment. So it's not about what we want to do or not want to do, it's about the Constitution. We're not barbarians. And frankly, I disagree with Bruce that the ACLU should be careful what they wish for. I think the ACLU would love it if executions were broadcast across the country and the world, because that would probably end the death penalty in America, because America would not be able to stomach what happens in those execution chambers where people are flapping around like fishes on beaches waiting to die. And this can be done, you can execute somebody with a firing squad in a matter of seconds. The fact that we're taking 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour to kill people is just preposterous and can't go on.
And you brought up the constitutional issue of whether this is cruel and unusual. We've got two opposing viewpoints. I'd like you both to listen to this. The first from a forensic doctor, the second from Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. Take a listen.
There are a lot of people that think it's totally inhumane. There's about 2,300 volts that come through the body, and then a second round with 1,000 volts, a third round with, again, thousands of volts. This is, not only is it painful, but there's a sizzling, a burning of the body. I would not suggest that it is a humane way to die.
We need to get very, very serious about treason. And oh, by the way, for treason, as in the case of Bradley Manning or Edward Snowden, you bring back the death penalty.
There's Colonel Ralph Peters talking about capital punishment in terms of treason, something we've gotten away from as we're paying for Bradley Manning to have a sex change rather than dealing with the notion of treason and capital punishment. Two very different ideas here. Bruce, as you hear those different arguments, your take on the death penalty, and will it remain as public policy in the United States?
I think in the short term it will. I think Dan is right in the sense that if the American public knew really more about what goes on in the death penalty system and how the death penalty is administered and whether the death penalty really achieves what we're trying to achieve as a policy matter, that the American public probably wouldn't support the death penalty. And my personal view is that over the long haul, for that reason and for the costs involved, we may see the death penalty go away. I'm not saying whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that's what we're going to see.
Last word to you, Bruce. We got about a minute and a half left on this whole notion. Has the nation evolved past capital punishment? Do you believe it will leave as the punishment utilized in the United States for the commission of first-degree murder and other capital crimes?
I think at some point it will, but it may be for the reasons unrelated to whether it's good policy or bad policy. I think it's going to be driven by cost factors. State budgets are very tight. The death penalty is very expensive to implement, and also because there's so much error in the system, and we're seeing a lot of evidence of innocent people being on death row, and I think that's going to drive it as well.
Dan, forgive me. We let you have first crack at it. You got 30 seconds. Make your case for eliminating the death penalty, sir.
Well, Bruce hit the nail on the head. There's too many errors in the system. The system is not good enough at this point to execute people because we can't be sure we're not executing the innocent. And if we do choose to execute somebody, we have to do it in a humane way because we are a civilized society and we don't torture people. And if we're going to torture people, then we should at least look in the mirror and say, okay, we're comfortable torturing people. And I don't think America wants to do that.
Dan Hochheiser and Bruce Reinhart. Gentlemen, we thank you for your legal perspective, and America's Forum will continue on Newsmax TV following this timeout.